There's a difference between being a human being and a human doing. Zachary Ragan joins us from Tulip Hill Recovery to talk about his non-traditional recovery story and working in the substance abuse treatment industry. While he agrees that those that work in the industry need to work on their recovery in their own time, he says if you aren't connecting while at work, you are doing it wrong. Enjoy. Welcome to the Illuminate Recovery podcast. We shed light on mental health issues, mental illness, and addiction recovery. Ways to cope, manage, and inspire. Beyond the self-care we will discuss, you may need the help of a licensed professional. My name's Kurt Nider. I'm a husband, a father, entrepreneur, a handyman, and a student of life. I avoid conflict, I deflect with humor, and I'm fascinated by the human experience.
And I'm Shelley Mangum. I am a clinical mental health counselor, and my favorite role of all times is grandma. I am a seeker of truth, and I feel like life should be approached with tremendous curiosity.
I ask the dumb questions.
I fill in the gaps.
The Illuminate Recovery podcast is brought to you by Illuminate Billing Advocates. Make billing and collection simple with leader in substance abuse and mental health billing services. Verification and analysis of benefits, pre-authorizations, utilization management, accurate claim submission and management, denial and appeal management, and industry-leading reporting. Improve your practice's cash flow and your ability to help your clients with Illuminate Billing Advocates.
Today on the podcast, Zach Ragan is joining us. Zach is the Chief Operating Officer at Tulip Hill Recovery. He's experienced executive with a demonstrated history of working in the addiction and behavioral health industry. He is skilled in business development, operations management, strategic planning, leadership, clinical knowledge, revenue collection, data analytics, and program and business development. He has an MBA and he is licensed as a level 2 drug and alcohol abuse counselor in the state of Tennessee, and he has many other accomplishments. Zach, we are super excited to have you today. Thank you.
I'm glad to be here. Thank you guys for hosting me.
Kurt and I have a lot of fun on the podcast, and it's always fun to meet people. You're from Tennessee, and you've got that little accent going on. It's so funny because I've had people say, "Where are you from? You've got that accent," and I'm like, "I don't have an accent. I think you're the one with the accent."
Yes, I do get that quite often. So,
but I love
the South. Tennessee drawl. So
yeah, I love the South. They are some of the kindest, most hospitable people I know. So it's fun to have you on. Well, let's start out maybe by letting the listeners get to know you a little bit, Zach. Give us an idea as to how you ended up in the recovery industry and maybe a little bit about your journey into that role.
Yeah, so my journey really starts back August of 2012 is the first time I worked in treatment and worked at a facility in a little bit outside of Nashville, Tennessee, and started as a part-time behavioral health tech, as a lot of people call it, resident assistant. Everybody has different terminologies they use, but really that frontline staff that's working with the clients. I'd gotten sober a year before that, myself on my personal recovery journey, and had really just started deciding, in my addiction, had really blundered some things with college, with school. I had some under my belt, didn't go well, and was, at that self-analytical time of, going back to school, working part-time, what I want to do with my life, and was working with a lady that said her, father-in-law worked out at a treatment center. Transportation was what he did, and he drove clients back and forth. And I told her, because she asked the question, she said, "What do you want to do? You're back in school." And I said, I have no clue at this time, undeclared. But I said, psychology interests me. And at this point, because I did have a non-traditional kind of recovery experience and hadn't thought about working in the treatment industry. And so she said, "Well, you should go out there and talk to them. You'd love it. You could get into some more things." Went out there and interviewed, and he said, "You know what? You should probably be a RA," is what they called it. And so I started, like I said, August 2012 as a part-time, RA, was going to school. And from there, it just grew and evolved. I mean, I fell in love instantly with the work we do, with the treatment industry as a whole, with recovery. I mean, at the facility I was at, we treated not just drug and alcohol addiction. We treated eating disorders, sex and love addiction, intimacy disorders. We treated all mental health. So we had mental health primary programs. It was detox and residential only at the time. And so I got a lot of great experience and a lot of diversity with really a national market. So it was funny, you were talking about the Tennessee Southern draws. We got clients from all over and even internationally. And they would get there and they'd say, "What does everybody mean, bless your heart?" And things like you said, or the words we would use, they'd say, "Where is over yonder?" Or "Where are all these things y'all are talking about?" So not uncommon, get that a lot. But did start, part-time. RA got, like I said, fell in love with the clinical work and started pursuing my licensure. And toward the end of that, like even today, I literally, like I told you before I got over here, just did a group for an hour with our clients here at Tulip Hill Recovery, where I'm currently at. Fell in love with clinical work, but I quickly realized I will forever be grateful for those that do clinical work full-time, day in and day out, and hold that space with our clients, because I like to kind of pop in and pop out and, do crisis intervention or do some education. But got more into operations management, and so I decided to go back to Tennessee State University and get my MBA and really help. Today, really I explain my job is, as me and the CEO, help drive the bus, create the story, cater to the culture, but also create the container for our clients to be in, that we hopefully create a safe container, create one that has connection, that provides those needs that they didn't get met throughout life. And so just a quick kind of overview of where I've been, where I'm at, and how I got here, and definitely just look forward to kind of any other avenues we take it down.
That's fantastic. I love that, you love the psychology, but you've been able to do that blend of the business side, the MBA part, and the psychology, and kind of fit all of those together. I think, for me too, I like that balance, because I struggle to be able to just focus on one area like client care and treatment. But the business side is also fascinating, and it needs some serious attention. So I love that you've got a good balance of both of those.
For sure. That's definitely what I've appreciated, is having the clinical foundation in every decision being made, because obviously business decisions at times, are business decisions, but in our field, I'm a huge believer in our product clinically. I mean, if we were looking at a business as a whole, that's who and what we are. We're not making, we're not a factory producing an item somewhere. We are a clinical product. It's a service industry, and the better that is, the better business is, the more employee morale there is, the better outcomes. All the goals get met through having a great product. And I've seen a lot of people that disconnect really be what hurts organizations is not understanding what we're doing at the end of the day.
Well, and somebody who's out there looking for treatment, maybe for the first time or even the 10th time, it's a really vulnerable place, and there's a ton of shame, and there's a ton of, risk of losing their lives and overdosing. That, that first initial contact and how you proceed in the very beginning is so vital, as well as that entire recovery journey.
For sure. I mean, it is start to finish. And, I remember one of the things I was trained in pursuing my licensure, and not to go into too many details with that, but there's certain areas you really got to kind of have your internship hours in. And one was admissions and intake. And that's where my supervisor, which I'm forever grateful for, that supervised me, she stressed the importance of that's the clinical relationship starting. It's the family calling, the client calling, taking that leap of faith and doing the most vulnerable part of what they may do up to that point of just saying, I need help, and being there to support that, and not making it a sales pitch, because it's not a sales pitch. It's a service that if you're the right fit and you meet the need, you build that connection right there. And that's a huge part of what I believe we do well currently at Tulip Hill, is really starting that connection there and then carrying that throughout the treatment. And I see a lot of people that do that well, but I've also seen that, not go so well. And it really can start the relationship off wrong, because that's really what our business is. It's a huge relationship we have with our clients and the families.
Yeah, I agree. And relationships are the healing piece, right? If that's the only thing we could depend on, those relationships are crucial and pivotal. So I agree. It has to be about the relationship and creating those, those bonds and that connection.
For sure.
You talked about having a non-traditional recovery. Can you talk about what a non-traditional recovery looks like?
Yeah, so for me, I grew up, like you said, in Tennessee, outside of Nashville, in a town, Dixon County was the county, and I moved a couple things throughout my childhood a couple times, and grew up in what people would call a dysfunctional family system. as probably I was just doing a group of clients, and probably more people have them than they realize, because we are all human and humans breed dysfunction at times. And as we become aware of it, we heal. But through my journey, kind of the short version is, I had my experience through my adolescent, teenage years, get to adulthood, and I really had my spiritual experience first, where some people have to kind of break down, go through that first step, try to build that connection, seek that second and third step thing, or whatever their method or whatever way they're seeking their recovery or doing their recovery process. But I just really had my spiritual experience that opened my eyes to a lot of things that I had gravitated away from in my life. A lot of that, again, I was just doing group over the true self and authentic self. It's like I ran smack face into that person that I always was, that I lost in my addiction. And of course, I had to do things. I moved into a safe environment, safe home, got involved with the local church I'm still a part of, but really started doing some of the things that it took with community, with doing my own work through, individual counseling. Thankfully, and I tell people, actually, I'll be honest, I get hesitant to tell my story working in treatment, because, good old addict mind will say, oh, okay, I don't need to go get help, I can just do it. And I tell them, I said, trust me, even though I didn't go through a center, I did a lot of the same stuff you're having to do, and I wished I could have came to a place like this. Unfortunately, one thing at that point in my life, financially, or just that door would not have been opened, would not have had access to good treatment, or even the possibility. So I'm very fortunate and blessed in my recovery journey. And, to be honest, we always tell people don't do their work at the place you work at or in treatment. But I tell people, if you're not getting changed and hitting things of yourself, working with our population, you're not really engaged, because our stuff's going to come up, then we go work on it, we come back. And as we know, recovery is a lifelong journey in general. So yeah, a little bit non-traditional in that sense. And that's the easiest way to kind of recap it, is just have that spiritual experience first, which if we look at, 12-step foundations, and that's kind of how they had their moment, is that spiritual experience that led to the formulation of what's a hugely, popular, obviously, outlet for recovery today, the 12 steps.
I love that. And you talk about connecting with a local church, congregation, and connecting with them and getting involved with them. Often I hear people in recovery, and they definitely have a spirituality and they connect spiritually, but a lot of them, they want to get away from organized religion. It doesn't sound like that's the route that you took. Do you have some perspective there and insight as to how people grab hold of spirituality, whether it's in a church, or whether it's, in nature?
For sure. And, and what I will say is, even about, so being, calling it a church, is even the group that I fellowship with, it is very spiritual based. And so I think at the essence of spirituality and the whole conversation around religion, spirituality, religion can become very abusive, very, again, it's humans doing human things that get involved and create systems that are dysfunctional. And people can, and one of the biggest things I've seen is people struggle with religious abuse and spiritual abuse, even, of that those are the deepest wounds sometimes, that are the hardest to get to, because that blocks them from any connection to anyone or anything outside of themselves. Usually actually starting with their experience with their parental figures that represented some sense of a higher power. But for me, I found a group that, to kind of sum it up, spirituality for me is about connection. We got back to relationship and connection. If I am having to go through just rituals and just things that I do, or just belief systems, and I have no sense of connection, no sense of purpose, not just to the people there, but about the thing. And again, that's not just for a Christian church, or somebody that's a practicing Buddhist, or somebody that's Islamic, or whatever foundation it is, whatever system we have, if we're not connecting through that system to that essence or that spirit or that deity, or kind of whatever we label it as and put it as, we're really losing that lack of that which we're seeking. And we're just checking boxes, which again gets back to recovery for me. People can be compliant in recovery and not stay sober because we're just checking boxes. We're not doing those things that breed connection and build relationship. And for me, really help us discover who we are as a person and find purpose and meaning. In the recovery field, that's why I'm passionate about it, is because it's what I believe I'm designed to do from my creator, my higher power, like however we want to look at it. And I usually do very well with those people that may have had that, because, those wounds or those abuses, because I think being open-minded goes a long way with whatever belief system you have, whatever background. I've worked with atheists, I've worked with agnostics, I've worked with people with different cultural beliefs, religious beliefs. And thankfully, as a society, we're not there yet, but we're getting more shift in that direction of allowing people to have their experience, their journey. And I think that's really what clinical, again, getting back to my clinical training, that's what that is letting people be themselves and human and explore that and helping facilitate that. So on both ends, the person helping, but also the client, to be open-minded. I've seen people that we have a guy that I remember at that first treatment center I worked at that came in extremely, he was atheist. Like anything that got mentioned was a huge deal. And he accidentally got signed up for a session with, at the time we had like a Christian track out there. And he was a philosophy major in school, the client was, and got into a session with him, had a whole life shift in that session. And just started asking questions that he had never allowed himself to ask, and started to trust and believe that maybe something was out there that he could connect with. And again, all avenues of spirituality. We had a holistic, approach to where we did a lot of, contemplative practices and things. And clients, we did a lot of Native American spirituality out at the place I was at as well. And that was something that was less threatening to a lot of clients because it wasn't as built in dogmatic or tradition or doctrine or these standard beliefs, again, that it's kind of like, we know the age-old story. It's like people telling you to do one thing, then you see them doing another. Then it's a lot of disconnect. It's like, we show up to church on Sunday, everybody acts good, then we go back home, and then everything's a mess. Like something's disconnected here. So I've seen thankfully, been around a lot of recovery options that incorporate alternative spiritualities, which I think is key, because we don't need to try to pigeonhole somebody in recovery to one way, one approach, one thing. And even at Tulip Hill, we have treatment avenues that we believe are the best fit for our capabilities, what we do, how we do it. But we work with partners that do things that we don't do for a lot of different reasons. And so I think my big message has been, too, since being at Tulip Hill and being more involved in business development and marketing, and, we're all better together. We do well with connection. We do well with working with one another to serve clients, not working against one another. And I know our business at times can be very back and forth and just all the stuff that goes on. But the more we work together to really try to get to the core mission and root of what we're dealing with, the better we'll be and the better the clients we serve will be, and the more helpful we will become. Because at the end of the day, the sad reality is there's too much business out there for our industry, and we're not making enough ground. So whether that's a spiritual approach, a secular program alone, whatever approach that is, hopefully a client finds something for them that they can grab a hold of, build connection with, build relationship, and sustain a lasting recovery.
And I think that you touched on something that's super vital, is that I think, especially as teenagers today and young people, we spend so much time being inundated with the message of, how do we become this perfected person, right? Because if I'm going to be the perfect person, I've got to wear the right clothes, I've got to look right, I've got to be with the right people. And the message, I think that what you're saying is, we all come individual. We all are different, and there is a space for every one of us in our uniqueness and our differentness, our differentness, and we need to celebrate that. And I think that's one of the messages that we have to send, because that's where the shame and the stigma and a lot of that resides, is, but I'm not the way, Instagram or Facebook or whatever says I should be. Yeah. And so I think it's absolutely imperative that we can find a place where we belong, that accepts us exactly the way we are. And that gets messy when we're in recovery. And when I say recovery, it's not just substance abuse or mental health, it's life, right? Life is all a journey of recovery, from trying to figure out who we really are and how we want to show up.
Excellent point. And again, just because it's a fresh thing on my mind, the group I was just doing talks about that, true self that begins to go through those experiences is what we call trauma. And a lot of my philosophical and, belief around addiction and around mental health is rooted in trauma, and not just what we think of as the big T traumas of major life events that our brain acknowledges as a threat to ourselves, but all the small T stuff around not having needs met of emotionally absent parents, or obviously, again, with big T trauma, we can identify that, but those messages we get, like you said, like not being accepted, not being made to feel validated, not ever having anyone show up for you. And so that leads to that sense of human condition. And again, that is really the human condition, I believe. And that's where spirituality comes into play, is like, how do we find those things that start to provide those needs in people and places, like you said, even nature. I've seen a lot of clients that, as we get to the higher power discussion, it's like, do you enjoy being in nature? Do you feel connected to something bigger than you? They'll say yes. Great. Start there. And even if that's all you ever have, like, wonderful. You have something, and there's no judgment either way. Like, whether that's what you stick with, not stick with, start somewhere, somehow, something. And, you know, the sad reality, and not to kind of stay focused on too much, but is with religion, that's where the disconnect became, is because it is more about perfectionism and having goals and acting a certain way. And there's a big difference of, I think, being a human doing and a human being, where we get to be who we are compared to just do things that we're supposed to do.
I agree. I could not agree more. If I misunderstood your story, correct me, but it sounded like you did your recovery outside of your family unit, and that maybe wasn't the safest place. Can you talk about that journey a little bit and the role that family can play in recovery?
Yeah, so family shapes, not for everyone, because obviously there's some people that grew up without even not even just a traditional family system, but any form of constant, unfortunately there's people that bounce around and get tossed to and fro and never really have a thing they call family. But in a sense, whether it's a split family, a still family where the parents are married, or whatever the scenario is, we get shaped and molded by that early experience in a system. And I believe that everybody has a part to play. Like if we look at ACA or the program of adult children of alcoholics, and they really expand that to dysfunctional families, everybody begins to play these roles, and everybody begins to fill these things to try to meet needs of that family system. And the dysfunction starts breeding in through people not having their needs met. And again, I just told the clients earlier, like, it's not just you today, it's your generations past. Things get passed along to us genetically, behaviorally. And so we learn, okay, we don't talk about these things. We don't, you're not allowed to have feelings. You're not allowed to, be open. Like you said, explore yourself. Don't do that. Thankfully, we're getting more to a place, I think, societally, where those things are becoming accepted. But the family piece is huge, because typically the person that gets to us, everybody sees as the issue and the problem. But then what we help unpack and realize is, like, they have maladapted to all the things going on and began to use drugs, began to use alcohol. Again, whatever the addiction could be, food, sex, relationships, whatever it is that we're using to medicate, everybody plays a part and a parcel in through, whether it's codependency, whether it's emotionally absent, whether it's whatever part they play. The family helps create kind of the issue, for lack of better words, and the family can help rehabilitate that as a unit. And so I'm a huge believer in doing family work, doing work with spouses, because the client can grow themselves. And unfortunately, I've seen this through the years, where sometimes the client gets to us, does their work, and they don't fit into that family system anymore, or they don't fit into that marriage or that relationship or that workplace. Because again, for me, dysfunctional systems are at play, and the dysfunctional families is one thing, but even the system, like all those roles get played out at work, at school, and sporting activities, at whatever it is we're a part of. We bring that role that we've learned to play in society and try to operate in that to survive, instead of bringing who we really are as a person and getting to show up with that, because we were taught that's not okay to be that, so we don't bring that. And so part of that piece is helping the family understand what the client's going through, what the addictive piece is, what the mental health disorder is, but then looking in the mirror and saying, but what part does everyone have to play in this, and what part does everybody need to do in themselves to really, again, it goes back to that human condition, to better themselves as a human, not just somebody in recovery, the traditional way of thinking, then drugs and alcohol and mental health.
Well, and it's fascinating, that family dynamic, because it's all we knew, right? It's all we knew. That's what we grew up in, and it's all we knew. And until we get a little bit older and can go out and see somebody else's family dynamic, we don't even have the opportunity to recognize that ours might be a little bit different than somebody else's. And it's still curious, right, that we come into it and it is so eye-opening to go, yeah, we all play roles in our family, some more profound than others. And, we've taken on responsibilities that have been unspoken. And that to me, that is just a stage of huge awareness and eye-opening opportunities because, we just don't grow up being aware of those pieces.
Most certainly, and that's the veil that usually has to be lifted in treatment. Is just speaking to a gentleman yesterday that said, I asked him that question. I said, you're in treatment, and I said, what role does your family have to play? And he said, we have the perfect family. And I said, okay. I said, I'll be honest with you, I've yet to meet that, and so I would, it would be awesome if you did. But I said, if we really took a look at it, and he said, well, we're an Iranian family, and we have to have that image and that prestige. And I said, right. So I said, that's the image that's put on, but behind all that, what all contributed? And he started naming off a list of things. And so a lot of times clients for the first time had that realization that there's more going on. And like you said, it was normal. That's the sad part of some of the traumatic experiences we began to process here. Is like the client was sharing group. Well, everybody got smacked with a belt, maybe too hard or whatever. And some of the clients will say, you know what? No, I never went through that, went through some other things, but that wasn't there. And they start to realize, okay, that's not normal that every Friday night dad comes home drunk and does this or does that. And, it's just eye-opening for a lot of the clients to, like you said, start to realize, okay, not every family system has what mine has, and start to experience what is functional, what's dysfunctional, what's healthy look like, what's unhealthy look like. And again, that's the whole getting sober is just the tip of the iceberg of what we do, not just Tulip Hill Recovery, but the treatment field. And for those seeking treatment, it's like, yes, that's the very first thing to get into treatment is get yourself detox, get yourself off whatever, and detox from, excessive food intake, lack of, again, sexual addiction, whatever it is, get yourself not doing the behaviors so that we can start to do that work of when things surface, what's your habits you go back into, what's the roles you start trying to play again, how do you show up, how do you survive, and really do that deeper level of work.
Yeah, and it's all about, and even then you could take that information, that awareness, and say, oh, it's all my family's fault, right? And start down that road
Right.
of blame. But the opportunity to say, how do I want to show up? What do I want to look like as a human being? And what are the patterns that I want really helps to take away that blame thing, which gives away our power, right? It just gives away all of that power to change to somebody else and say, well, if you'll change, then then my life will be okay. But it's totally given up all your power. And so I love that journey of being able to see the dysfunction. And it's fascinating how perception plays into dysfunction because two people in the same family could have two very different experiences. Maybe, one big T traumas experience, felt like big T traumas, and the other one it was little T traumas or whatever. And so you can't really go back to the family dynamic and say that was everything. It's also the way we perceive our world. And then to give them those choices of you get to choose. You get to choose how you're going to move forward. You get to choose that journey. You get to choose how to write your story from here on out. How do you want to do it is super empowering. And I love that part about recovery.
Couldn't agree more that I think that, yes, all of it's kind of pieces to a puzzle. And, same thing a client can do with anything else that they're dealing with. I teach a lot about, traditional brain disease education around some of the dysfunction that's going on neurobiologically in the brain with addictive processes and things. And, again, we can't just say, oh, okay, well, it's my brain's fault and the disease fault. I have no accountability or, that. And it's like, well, that's the result of all these things. And now you have responsibility. Or, even a first step, like I'm powerless and I have no control or responsibility. I'm like, well, that becomes the behavior we're talking about of rationalizing or minimizing. Like you have the responsibility to show up now and get help and do those things. And again, even with family, I tell clients two things. Like, yeah, we're not playing the blame game. These aren't just awful bad people. And obviously in some scenarios, it's like harder to muster than others. But even in general, it's families that aren't bad people. It's just they had things that were imperfect about them that led to imperfections in the system. And then you didn't get needs met. And now you're maladaptive. You found maladaptive ways to cope and to use. And like, how do we look at that today? And exactly what you said, how do you contribute? How do you show up? How do you start to be yourself in that system and then hope that that system accepts you and changes and like allows you to be who you are in that system?
Yeah, for sure. You kind of talked about that first program you worked at, and they dealt with a lot of different things: substance abuse, mental health, eating disorders, sexual addiction, and pieces like that. How do you feel like, were you able to, did you feel like in a program that addressed all of those different things, and we know at the core a lot of the drivers are the same, but did you feel like you could be successful treating that diverse of a population?
Yeah, I'd say it was extremely successful. One thing, I mean, it was a 152 bed facility where it had programs within the program, so it wasn't an eclectic. Everybody's in the same groups. I mean, of course, it did some general educational groups, different things. There's very diverse programs created to address those individual issues because there are, I agree, a lot of the same key driving factors behind the addictions, but there's a lot of different behavior in the addiction and a lot of ways to manage that behavior. And even in the standalone mental health, I mean, I used to have that conversation with clients a lot that would be doing group together. And I'd say, I know you're the mental health population, you're the addiction population, but there's so much crossover. How, again, gets back to how can we connect and relate? But also, yes, there are some individual needs that had to be met. So was it an easy task? No. Was it achieved? I believe with the right system, the right resources, the right, right people. It's definitely able to be accomplished. But also, I've seen some models go the other way where it's kind of like a potluck and everybody gets thrown the same exact thing. And again, to me, philosophically, I do believe a lot of it's driven in trauma and a lot of needs not being met or things happening to us. And my personal belief is that, but also there's a lot of individuality needed in the treatment approach. It can't be a cookie cutter option to treat a diverse population. And even in addiction, as we know, like that's the thing that I think our field's obviously become more adapted to, is we've always separated mental health, addiction. Again, to me, it's really so much of the human condition. Obviously, people are dealing with mental health issues without substance abuse, but honestly, I don't see too many people abusing substances without a form of mental health. I'm not yet seeing that of some form of anxiety or depression or just something with a mood disorder, personality disorder, something contributing to where, again, and I see that, like the tip of the iceberg is educating them on those main things that separate them with the food disorders or substance abuse disorders or those things, the education piece, the how to cope with it, how to deal with it, retraining the brain to not require the need to medicate through it. But then everybody has that underneath work that, again, for somebody not dealing with substance abuse, addiction, has to do in themselves. And that's really the spiritual part. Let's kind of get back to the original question too, of like, that's the spirituality work there, is to ask those big questions underneath all of that and to find that answer, and then to process through that belief of, I didn't get my needs met, and I used to believe I was worthless. I was hopeless. Nobody loved me. So I developed depression. I developed anxiety. I developed suicidal, ideations because I had grief and loss, and I never got to process, and I never felt connected to the world around me. So I felt like everything was better off without me. And so getting to those underneath things, but also treating the tip of the iceberg, was something I felt like was done well where I was at. And then also in today's world, like I think that's really where the industry is going as a whole. And I know we kind of even have behavioral health that encompasses a little bit of everything, but it's not a one part and parcel thing we're doing anymore, is my belief. I think it really comes, whether you realize you're treating it or not, typically you're treating a lot of the thing with the one client that we'll call a substance abuse patient.
Oh, for sure. And it's not uncommon for, one addiction to, move to another addiction. As you heal one, you just want to move right over into another addiction. And it's those same core, drivers that are driving those behaviors of avoidance and getting away from it. And so you have to, I don't know that you can truly, get yourself in anything other than a white knuckle without going into the core of those situations and saying, what's really driving this, and why am I pushed so much and driven towards that, whatever that substance is, or whether it's depression or anxiety, and all of those different patterns. And the piece that you talked about too is it's so important to understand our addiction, why we are driven that way, what that looks like, what are our thinking processes, and that's important. But I think somebody who's open to, and I'm not suggesting that we don't have, very detailed and specialized treatment. But somebody who's open to recovery is going to find places to heal and information to heal regardless of the environment they're in, right? Because the process is very similar and the change that has to take place is very similar.
Right. Most certainly. And that's get back to my personal recovery journey. Like I did utilize 12 steps on the front end to get sober. And as I began to learn about them through work in the field, and again, even today where we do a lot more diverse clinical work than 12 steps and where I was at, like that was a part of the program. But we utilized 4 agreements or, other more kind of outside of just the clinical modalities, avenues people take. But I went through that natural progression in myself that a lot of people would do. And that really is that journey. Like we build language around it, we build outlets to work it, but it's really the same process. And some people hear it with different language, different avenues, different ways. But yeah, there is that process that really gets naturally taken. And I believe for me, a lot of the driving factor is that disconnect and lack of intimacy with ourselves. And so we become disconnected. And I think that's why we see the opioid epidemic we see is the inability of us to show up emotionally because we're a more disconnected society than ever. I mean, not just technology. I know that gets blamed for a lot, but again, technology is used good, bad, different ways. But we work more, longer hours. We're less family time. We're less on the go. More on the go, less ever having those bonds being built, more disconnected. We don't learn, in the brain, the opiate reward system is built off connection and attunement and having, that ability to really feel in tune with someone and bonded and have that secure attachment. And we have a society that that could be a whole several series of podcasts of why we are today where we're at today in society. But I do believe the opioid epidemic is not just because people have physical pain issues, go to a doctor and get prescribed opiates. That may be where it starts, but that triggers all their pain relief of all the psychological things they've been dealing with. And opiates are so key because it starts to provide those chemicals that we did not learn how to naturally regulate with endorphins and just oxytocin and some of these chemicals that build bonds and relationship and connection with ourselves and others. And we get that falsely provided through a pill now. And it makes the person feel like, okay, I get what I've always been looking for. This feels great. It feels amazing. I can go to work and enjoy my job. I can get up and want to be productive. And obviously we know where that leads. But I think, again, a lot of what we're seeing is pain being medicated, but also lack of connection and trying to find that through something and, something outside of ourselves.
Yeah, absolutely. These are all, everything we're talking about is just key to that recovery process for every one of us. This is about living a healthy, happy life. And it's not exclusive to any one of these, addictions or mental health or any of those pieces we're talking to. It's really about living a full and wholehearted life. You talked about, that idea of connection and relationship and being key. And often, when someone's in recovery, it's suggested that they stay away from having an intimate relationship until they have some recovery under them. And I just throw that in there kind of as a preface, but you've been in recovery a long time. What does your relationship with your family look like at this point? And have you ever been able to kind of create some sort of connection there? And then what about intimate relationships? What was that journey like for you, and what's your take on that?
For sure, yes. So that is the assignment that a lot of people will be given, is like you said, to avoid the intimate relationships for a time and a season. Some people do the year, some do other, lengths of time. As part of the assignment, obviously people do different methods individually. But for me, there's been a lot of repair there with the family piece. Thankfully, one thing is I feel very, blessed and fortunate. Some of my other family members have actually been through treatment centers and through their own recovery journey, truly, for substance abuse issues or other things, and they're in a different place than they were. So that's made it easier to do those bonds and connection. There are some family members that haven't done that work, that the relationship is more absent still, and it's not what I've been able to create with some other members of the family. So it's very diverse, but also, I think for the the individual in recovery, one of the hardest shifts too is getting out of, we talk about doing inner child work or things like that. Like I had my experience growing up in that household, and today now I'm an adult that is a different age than the boy that went through those things. And so even the relationship with a family in a healthy sense should be different and change. But a lot of people get stuck in those old wounds, old things that have happened and not process and get past. So even for me, I've moved past a lot of that. So even with the members that haven't, I still just allow them to be who they are and what they are. And obviously disconnect from some things that just aren't okay to be a part of my life. But for me, again, I've seen that with some clients that they're the only one that does get better in their family system, and they're just not able to engage. And that's the saddest reality, because, obviously the ones we're closest to know the best. Typically people get sober and want to see everybody else get sober, and it just doesn't happen always. So to reiterate one more time, I'm just really blessed and fortunate for that to be my experience. And then in my personal journey, I really just spent a lot of time focusing on myself, doing my recovery journey, and I actually am married now with a child, and had our little baby boy Roman about 3 months ago, and he's of course no greater feeling is there. Child, he's just my whole life right now. And but I got married in 2020, and actually in the pandemic we were scheduled. The wedding was supposed to be May 2020, and COVID had other plans, and we did go ahead and officially get married and did our event later that year. But my wife, she actually is a master's level clinician in the field, and then getting her PhD currently to become a psychologist. But that was something that happened for me as well. I was very patient, took my time, didn't rush into it, because, and the thing I tell the clients is we attract where we are today. So if you're 2 weeks sober and you still have all that stuff undone, typically you're not going to attract that person you want to attract in your mind, because you're just not there yet. And like, if you give it some time, you're going to have that person. And that's for me. Like, I made it through a lot of my journey, a lot of my experience. Had I met who's my wife now, like 8-9 years ago, probably wouldn't have hit it off the way it did. And so I had to be patient. I had to do that. And really, because again, for me, I had to get that back within myself, to where I don't need someone to fill that void, but that void's beginning to be filled through an internal process, and now I can share that with someone. And so that's what I really tell people is, we use codependency as the number one term, but is if we have that void in us and we're just trying to fill it with a person, a relationship, a thing, the relationship typically doesn't work out. It becomes dysfunctional, and we either sacrifice all our needs, or we're asking them to sacrifice all their needs to meet ours, and we're not sharing the life together. And so that's really what relationship is sharing what each other have and sharing that life. But yet, in my journey, it took a while to get there. So very blessed, fortunate now on the back end of it. Passionately love my wife. She's the other one right there with my child, like two people I love dearly. So it's exciting time in my life.
I love the way you talk about that we attract the kind of people, based on where we're at, right? And the kind of recovery that we've done and how we're showing up in life. And if we do that early in recovery, or, early while we're still floundering, then you're right. Those relationships are very different than the ones that we can connect with after we've done a lot of healing work, and we learn how to show up, and we learn how to love who we are. It is very different, the kind of people that we attract. I'm just curious, do you get people that just look at you like deer in the headlights and have no idea what you're saying when, early in recovery?
Oh, for sure. Yes, you get some people that, all the different things, the deer in the headlights, or they're like, well, I know that's for everybody, but not for me, or just all the stuff you get. And of course you can't, the hardest part about our field is, can't make anybody get it. And I wish we had a magical formula, a magical modality. Again, that would be an addict's dream to take something or have a wand wave and it all be done instantly. But it's a process. So it is allowing people to have their experience sometimes, even when it's probably not going to succeed, in supporting them. And again, because as staff and being in recovery, we can begin to try to control their process to where, just like their parents did, try to control them. And like, I can't control another person in their life. I can influence, I can hold space, I can And even as a counselor, again, it goes back to my training of a job as a counselor is not to control them and get them to do what you want them to do. A counselor is to hold space, allow them to show up, allow them to succeed, allow them to fail, allow them to do all those things that, again, would have been a natural, healthy development as a child. And they had people holding space and teaching and growing and allowing. They didn't get that. So a counselor's role, not to be a parent, but to allow that process to unfold and to be educated and to be trained in modalities to help, work through that, to process it, deal with it, stir up old memories, develop new patterns of behavior, learn coping skills, do all those things that's required. And so, yes, very much you'll get the deer in the headlights and, they're just not there yet. Again, 2 weeks in, 3 weeks in, month in. I tell people to just sum it up with the relationship thing. And I had a counselor that I worked with personally tell me this, like even early on in my relationship with now my wife, it's, you start in a relationship at first, it's a lot of that neurobiology of endorphins flooding, dopamine release, serotonin's feeling good, oxytocin. It's all a big high, a big thrill. Then that settles down after a while. And then all these things start coming up. And I think for relationships, that's why I do recommend hitting the pause button for a little while, is because you got to be vulnerable in a relationship. Some people aren't ready to be that vulnerable 2 or 3 weeks in a recovery. And if they try to be, they don't have the skills to deal with what comes up out of that and to work through conflict resolution. Like I have learned that quickly in my year of marriage. There is a thing called conflict resolution that becomes more real than practicing it in a program or in therapy. It's that's why we do those things in recovery and therapy, because that's real life skills that you have to do. And so, to go back to the clinician I was working with that explained it, is he said, you used to in a relationship, you're dating, you can kind of step in the ring together, you can get out of the ring, you can step back in. But now once you become married, you're in that ring together and there's no stepping out. I mean, unless obviously it gets to that point to where it's not working, but the goal is to get in the ring together and stick together. And that brings up a whole nother level of lack of safety, lack of vulnerability. Vulnerability and lack of safety at first for some individuals in early recovery, but they're just not ready to deal with quite yet.
So true. I like the way you talk about, those relationships and that journey. I just remember, there's been so many times where, someone has told me a concept and I'm like, I have no idea what you're talking about. But then years later, it's like, oh, that's what they were talking about, right? And I use the analogy of like algebra, right? You're taught algebra and you're like, why am I doing equations with X's and Y's and letters, and what is this all about, and what's it supposed to do? And then the next year you go on to the next level and it's like, oh, that's what all of this stuff was for, so that I could do this later on, right? And I don't know, I kind of make that analogy that it's very much that way, is you've got to do the growth, you've got to do the work, you got to put your time in, and then those concepts really start to come to fruition, and what you might think you have now and understand now will still continue to grow and expand as you are on that journey of wholeness. So I love that concept. So appreciative, Zach, of you being on today and sharing some of those ideas, sharing some of your journey, and the work that you do. It's been super fun having you, and just listening to the work that is being done out there and the intensity of it, and the desire to just really help people find wholeness and healing.
For sure. No, I was glad to be on, and just to do our little plug super quick on, Tulip Hill Recovery. We are located in Tennessee, and, we're in Murfreesboro, Tennessee. It was the original location. It's been here about 5 years, and we just recently expanded Jackson, Tennessee. So that's between Memphis, Nashville area. And so we're growing. We're a PHP IOP long-term model. We have recovery residences to support. We do traditional drive-in. Take a true dual diagnosis approach. So definitely want to be one of the resources among many to help people find that journey, because that's really what we're here to do, is to facilitate an avenue for them to find that connection. So grateful to be on today. Loved the conversation, enjoyed it, and could talk about it all day for sure.
Well, and I'm excited about what Tulip Hill is doing as well. And, and the fact that you're growing suggests that your program is got merit and that it's doing well. And obviously the need continues to grow, and people's awareness of, what is recovery, and, do I really need help? I think that's growing, and that longevity, like you talked about, is we need a certain amount of time in recovery to really, anchor in that and be on that journey long enough that we can sustain outside of recovery. And so allowing a long-term program, especially with residents where they can live there, where they can find safety, I think is a huge contributor to success in the recovery path. So I have to give you kudos for the program that you've put together, and the way that it's been able to help people. It says a lot about your program, that you're growing and doing the good that you are.
Very much. Well, I appreciate that.
All right.
Sort of throw in some contact information.
Yeah. Yep. Do that. Do the contact information. I was trying to think what I'd missed.
Yeah, let me get it here. I know most of it by heart, but let me look at a number. Make sure I get it right. It wouldn't be good. Put out the wrong number there. All right. So if you're looking to get in touch with Tulip Hill Recovery to learn more about us, you could definitely go visit our website. It's www.tuliphillrecovery.com. So it is tulip like the flower, easy to remember. Quick thing is that was the road that our owner grew up on was Tulip Hill Drive. So he's a man in recovery as well. I didn't get to talk much about the owners and founders, but Ben and Tess Jones started that. So that's where we get our name from. That's the brand. We're a family feel, but also, as was said, growing and expanding our treatment centers. If you're interested in treatment too, give us a call at 877-845-8192. Definitely several different ways to connect with us: website, phone number, and or you can email our info line, which is just info@tuliphillrecovery.com.
Awesome. One of the things you pointed out today that I think is something I've been familiar with, but you kind of took it a different direction, is obviously there's, connection. And when you get into a group and when you start to learn more about recovery and addiction and all that kind of stuff, there's an educational component. But then as you get in a group, there starts to be this kind of eye-opening element of all of those things that you've had shame for. You're not the only one, right? And that really starts to create and breed connection. I don't know that anybody's ever pointed out or that I've recognized necessarily that in that same circumstance in a group, you could start to have those kind of eye-opening experiences of like, wait a minute, I am the only one. So maybe that's not my fault. Like you use the example of the belt, or, I'm sure there's a million trauma type circumstances, but I don't know that I've ever had anybody point that out before, and that's super fascinating. That it's almost the opposite response, but still creates connection of like something that you suffered through or that you've gone without, and it is different. I don't know. I think that's interesting.
No, it is very didactic, as they call it, because it is, certain instances and scenarios. And that's why I tell people, we can't really compare our trauma or, say, well, I shouldn't be using drugs because they went through all this and I only went through this. I'm like, well, your experience, I think Shelley said that best, like even in a family, two siblings go through the same experience, perceive it and adapt very differently. But so one thing, people's experience is their experience, but also the normalizing of trauma and behavior. Our brain almost does that to make it bearable, almost even in a response. And we don't know any different, for one thing too. It's like we just think that's the way it is. So it is a very interesting approach where I've had people go through unique things that they thought everybody went through. Not everybody does go through them, especially now in treatment. Obviously, most time they find people that really relate. But even as they go, to other places, like people may not relate and be like, you know what? No, that's not really the normal experience for a lot of people, or So yeah, it is an interesting concept.
Yeah, that's cool. Well, thanks, man. Appreciate you taking the time.